The ship called Gentle Dawn was dying. It floated without power in the purple clouds of the nebula, its engines cold and its lights flickering like a candle in the wind. Inside the ship, 43 crew members huddled together in the darkness, their thin bodies shivering as the temperature dropped lower and lower. Captain pressed her delicate fingers against the emergency beacon controls. Her species was not built for hardship. They were small and fragile, with pale blue skin and large eyes that could see beauty in everything. They were diplomats and peacemakers, known across the galaxy for their gentle ways and their gift for bringing enemies together. But gentleness could not fix a broken engine. Gentleness could not save them from what was coming. She activated the distress signal and watched it pulse out into the void. The message was simple. It gave their location and their situation. It asked for help, but knew the truth that made her heart sink with despair. They were in territory. No one would come. The Dominion controlled this region of space with an iron grip. They were conquerors and slavers, a species that saw all other races as either threats to destroy or resources to exploit. Any ship that entered their territory without permission became their property. Any crew became their slaves. The Galactic Union had learned long ago to avoid these borders. Better to lose one ship than to start a war. Looked at her crew, young who had joined this diplomatic mission with hope in their eyes, scientists and translators and healers. None of them were warriors. None of them could fight what was coming. She could already see the vessels on her failing sensors, 3 of them circling like predators waiting for their prey to weaken. 12,000 light-years away, on a human colony station called New Harbor, a young woman named Laura Grant was working the night shift in the communications center. It was quiet work, mostly monitoring automated signals and logging routine traffic. She was thinking about breakfast when her console lit up with an alert. Laura sat up straight and adjusted her headset. The signal was faint, buried in static, coming from deep in a region of space that was marked red on every chart. Restricted. Dangerous. Do not enter. She ran the signal through the translator and felt her stomach tighten as the words appeared on her screen. She picked up her communicator and called Commander Cole. Cole arrived in the communications center within minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and scars on his hands from battles he rarely talked about. He had served in the border wars 15 years ago, when humanity first met the hostile species of the outer sectors. He had seen things that would break most people, but he was still here, still serving, still answering calls in the middle of the night. Laura played the signal for him. Cole listened without expression, but she could see his jaw tighten when he heard the coordinates. The nebula was bad territory. They had killed 3 human survey teams there in the early days of expansion. The Galactic Union had formally requested that all member species avoid the area. It was one of those places where the rules of civilization simply did not apply. Cole pulled up the records on them. He read about their culture, their history, their role in the Union. They were respected throughout the galaxy as honest brokers and skilled mediators. They had helped end wars and prevented genocides. They were valuable to everyone except the who saw their weakness as an invitation. He made his decision in less than a minute. The announcement went out across New Harbor Station at 3 in the morning. Commander Cole was assembling a volunteer crew for a rescue mission into hostile territory. The mission was not sanctioned by the Union. There would be no backup. Anyone who went might not come back. Within an hour, Cole had more volunteers than he could use. He selected his crew carefully, would serve as chief engineer, was a quiet man who could make engines sing and who never panicked no matter how bad things got. Diana Shaw would handle medical duties. She was young but brilliant, with hands that could perform surgery during an earthquake and a mind that never stopped looking for solutions. Victor Marsh would lead the security team. He was a former soldier who had fought the before and survived, which was rare enough to make him valuable. The ship they would take was called the Resolute. It was a frigate-class vessel, built for speed and endurance rather than heavy combat. Human ships were different from those of other species. They were designed to handle stresses that would tear alien vessels apart. High-gravity maneuvers, extreme temperatures, radiation exposure that would kill most crews in minutes. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day. They had built their ships to match their nature. Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute and looked at his crew. 15 men and women who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. He could see no fear in their eyes, only determination. He thought about what the Galactic Union would say when they learned about this mission. They would call it foolish. They would call it a violation of established protocols. They would point out that the ship was probably already lost and that sending humans after them would only add to the casualties. But Cole had read the history of his own species. He knew what humans had done throughout their existence on their deadly. They had crossed frozen mountains to find new lands. They had sailed wooden ships across oceans that swallowed entire fleets. They had walked into burning buildings to save children they did not know. It was not logical. It was not safe. It was simply what humans did. The Resolute powered up its engines and moved toward the gate. Behind them, New Harbor Station grew smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars. Laura Grant watched them go from the communications center. She kept the channel open, tracking their signal as they entered and vanished from her screens. Then she did the only thing she could do. She waited. She hoped. In the nebula, the gentle dawn continued to drift. Captain continued to pray to gods she was not sure existed. The continued to circle. None of them knew that help was coming. None of them knew what humans were capable of when someone called for rescue. The Resolute burst out of like a bullet from a gun. The purple clouds of the nebula swirled around them, filled with dust and radiation that would slowly cook any ship that stayed too long. Cole stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the sensor display as the picture became clear. The gentle dawn was there just as the signal had promised. It hung motionless in the void, a beautiful ship designed for comfort and diplomacy rather than survival. Its hull was silver and elegant, covered in decorative patterns that told the story of culture. It looked fragile. It looked helpless. And around it, like wolves surrounding a wounded deer, were 3 hunter ships. The vessels were ugly things. They were built for one purpose only, and that purpose was violence. Their hulls were covered in weapon mounts and armor plating. Their engines glowed red with barely contained power. Each one was twice the size of the Resolute, and there were 3 of them. Victor Marsh looked at the odds and said nothing. He had faced worse during the border wars. He began preparing his security teams for whatever would come next. Ran calculations in his head and pushed the engine controls past their safety limits. The Resolute surged forward, accelerating at a rate that would have crushed any alien crew into paste. But humans had evolved under gravity that would kill most species. Their bones were dense. Their muscles were strong. They could survive forces that seemed impossible to other races. On the gentle dawn, Captain watched her sensors with confusion. A new ship had appeared. It was not Union. It was broadcasting on an open channel, and the voice that came through was strange and harsh, speaking in a language her translator struggled to process. The message finally came through clearly. "This is the human ship Resolute. We received your distress call. Hold on, we are coming to get you." Had heard of humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of them. They were a term used for species that evolved on planets so hostile that survival itself was an achievement. Humans came from a world of extreme temperatures, crushing gravity, deadly predators, and poisonous plants. They were supposed to be tough and aggressive, but also unpredictable. The Union treated them with caution. Other species treated them with fear. But had never seen them in action. She watched as the human ship charged directly toward the formation. It was not a tactic, it was not a strategy, it was madness. Warlord commanded the hunter group from his flagship, the Crimson Fist. He was old for his species, from 100 battles, and he had never lost a fight. When his sensors detected the human vessel, he felt something he had not felt in years: curiosity. He knew about humans from intelligence reports. They were new to the galaxy, having achieved interstellar travel only a few generations ago. They were considered dangerous but primitive, lacking the advanced technology of older species. One human ship against 3 hunters was not a fair fight. It was barely a fight at all. Ordered his vessels to intercept. He wanted to see what these could do. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the nebula like a storm. Plasma cannons lashed out at the Resolute, striking its shields with enough force to vaporize rock. The human ship shuddered under the impact. Warning lights flashed across every console. Hull integrity dropped by 15% in the first 10 seconds. But the Resolute kept coming. Cole called out orders with calm precision. His crew responded without hesitation. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. They knew that human ships were built differently from others. Where alien vessels tried to avoid damage, human vessels were designed to take damage and keep fighting. The Resolute returned fire with kinetic weapons. Simple projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds, punching through armor like needles through cloth. One of the hunter ships took a direct hit to its engine section. Fire bloomed across its hull. Felt the first touch of surprise. The humans were not running. They were not trying to escape. They were attacking, against superior numbers, against superior firepower. It made no sense. Inside the Resolute, things were getting bad. A plasma strike had breached the lower decks, and fire was spreading through the cargo section. Toxic fumes filled the corridors. The temperature was rising to levels that would kill most species within minutes. Victor Marsh led his damage control team into the burning section without protective gear. There was no time to suit up. Human lungs could filter smoke for short periods. Human skin could resist heat that would blister alien flesh. They worked with their bare hands, sealing breaches and containing fires while the ship shook around them. Performed miracles in the engine room. When the main coolant line ruptured, spraying superheated fluid across the deck, he grabbed the broken pipe and held it closed while his team welded a patch into place. The burns on his hands were severe. He barely noticed. He had a job to do. The Resolute maneuvered between the hunters and the gentle dawn. Cole positioned his ship as a shield, taking hits that were meant for the helpless vessel. Each impact rocked the bridge. Each impact cost them more systems, but they held the line. Cole opened a channel to Warlord. His voice was steady despite the chaos around him. "They are under our protection now. Leave or die." Stared at his display. The human ship was damaged. It was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds. It should be retreating. It should be begging for mercy. Instead, its commander was issuing threats. The Warlord had conquered dozens of species. He had broken warriors who were bred for combat. He had crushed resistance on 100 worlds, but he had never encountered anything like this. He gave the order to continue the attack. He wanted to see how far the humans would go. On the gentle dawn, Captain watched the battle unfold with growing wonder. The human ship was taking terrible punishment. It was burning in places. It was venting gas from cracks in its hull, but it did not retreat. It did not surrender. It stood between her people and death like a wall of iron. She did not understand humans. She did not know why they had come, but she began to believe, for the first time since her engines failed, that she might survive this day. The battle was far from over. They were not finished, and the humans had only begun to show what they could do when someone needed saving. Warlord watched the battle from his command throne and felt something unfamiliar crawling through his mind. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling. It was doubt. The human ship should have been destroyed by now. His hunters had hit it with enough firepower to crack a small moon. The damage was visible on his sensors. Entire sections of the human vessel were open to space. Fires burned inside its hull, its shields were failing, and yet it kept fighting. He ordered his ships to coordinate their attack. 3 hunters against 1 damaged human frigate. The outcome should have been certain. Victor Marsh gathered his security team in the Resolute's airlock. They wore emergency suits designed for hull repair, not combat. They carried cutting tools meant for asteroid mining, not warfare. But they were humans, and humans had a long history of using whatever was available to win fights they should have lost. The plan was insane by any standard. They would launch themselves across the void between ships, land on the hull of the nearest hunter, cut through its armor, and disable it from inside. No species in the galaxy had ever attempted boarding action against vessels. The very idea was considered suicide. Marsh looked at his team, 5 men and women who had volunteered for this mission. He saw no fear in their eyes, only focus. They launched from the airlock like missiles made of flesh and bone. The void embraced them with cold that would have frozen alien blood in seconds. Human blood ran hot. Human bodies could survive temperature extremes that killed other species. They crossed the distance between ships in 43 seconds, their magnetic boots locking onto the hull with a clang that echoed through the enemy vessel. The crew never expected an attack from outside. Their sensors were designed to track ships, not individual beings clinging to their hull. By the time they understood what was happening, Marsh and his team had already cut through the outer armor and were burning their way into the ship's interior. The fighting inside was brutal and short. Soldiers were tough by galactic standards. They were larger than humans, stronger in some ways, and completely without mercy. But they had never faced in close combat. Marsh broke the arm of the first who attacked him. He did it without thinking, his human reflexes and human strength turning the alien's charge into a disaster. His team moved through the corridors with terrible efficiency, disabling systems and eliminating resistance. Within 12 minutes, the first hunter went dark. Meanwhile, Diana Shaw was performing her own miracle. She had taken a medical shuttle to the Gentle Dawn while the battle raged around her. The small craft had no weapons and almost no shields. It was designed for rescue, not combat. But Diana flew it through the crossfire with skill that bordered on artistic, dodging plasma bolts and debris with movements that seemed impossible. She docked with the ship and found horror waiting inside. The Gentle Dawn had lost life support hours ago. The temperature inside had dropped to levels that were uncomfortable for humans but deadly for. Captain and her crew were dying slowly, their fragile bodies shutting down one system at a time. Diana worked without rest. She set up emergency heaters. She distributed thermal blankets. She injected medications that would slow the dying process. Her hands moved with speed and precision that came from years of training and a desperate need to save lives. They watched her with wide eyes. They had never seen a human before. Diana was tall compared to them, with dense muscle and thick bones that made her look like a giant. Her skin was dark and rough compared to their delicate blue. Her movements were fast and aggressive in ways that seemed almost violent. But her touch was gentle. Her voice was soft. She treated each patient with care that surprised them. Captain was the worst case. Her body had nearly given up. Diana carried her to the medical shuttle, cradling the captain in her arms like a child. Weighed almost nothing to human muscles. Diana barely noticed the burden. Back on the Resolute, the battle had reached its peak. Was holding the ship together through sheer will. The engine room was a nightmare of broken systems and emergency repairs. When a power conduit exploded, showering him with sparks that burned through his uniform, he patched it with his bare hands and kept working. When the artificial gravity failed in Section 7, he climbed through zero-G corridors to restore it manually. His burns were getting worse. His lungs were filling with smoke. A human doctor would have ordered him to stop hours ago, but was not going to let his crew down. He was not going to let the people on the gentle Dawn die because he was tired or hurt. Cole watched the second hunter try to retreat. He pursued without hesitation. The Resolute was damaged, but it was still faster than wounded prey. He caught the enemy ship at the edge of the nebula and finished it with a spread of kinetic rounds that tore through its reactor. 2 down, 1 to go. Warlord understood now what he was facing. The reports about humans had not done them justice. They were not just tough. They were relentless. They did not stop when they were hurt. They did not retreat when the odds were against them. They fought until they won or died, and they made their enemies pay for every moment of battle. He looked at his flagship, the Crimson Fist. It was damaged but still functional. He could run. He could escape into and report what had happened here, but had never run from a fight in his life. He was not going to start now. He turned his ship toward the Resolute and prepared for the final confrontation. On the gentle Dawn, Diana Shaw had stabilized 17 survivors, including Captain. She looked at her patients and felt exhaustion pulling at her bones. She had been working for hours without rest. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. But she could not stop. There were more who needed help. There was a battle still raging outside. She went back to work. The final confrontation was coming. The humans were tired and wounded and far from home. The warlord was proud and angry and desperate for victory. Something had to give. The Crimson Fist was the largest of the hunters, and Warlord commanded it with the fury of a wounded beast. His ship lunged at the Resolute with all weapons firing, plasma bolts streaming through the nebula like burning rain. Cole met the attack head-on. The two ships traded blows at close range, their weapons tearing into each other's hulls. The Resolute shuddered with each impact. Systems failed one after another. The bridge lights flickered and died, replaced by the red glow of emergency power. But Cole had been waiting for this moment. He had drawn close, let the warlord think he was winning, all while Victor Marsh and his surviving team members made their way back from the first ship. They hit the Crimson Fist from behind. Marsh and 3 of his people landed on the flagship's engine section and began cutting. They worked fast, their tools slicing through armor that was supposed to be invincible. The engineers inside never saw them coming. By the time alarms started blaring throughout the ship, the damage was already done. The Crimson Fist lost main power. Its weapons went silent. Its engines sputtered and died. Warlord sat on his command throne in the darkness, listening to the sounds of his ship dying around him. Cole ordered the Resolute to cease fire. The battle was over. The humans had won, but the cost had been terrible. The Resolute was barely holding together. 13 of the 17 crew members were injured, had collapsed in the engine room, his body finally giving out after hours of superhuman effort. Diana Shaw was treating burns and broken bones while still caring for the survivors. Cole looked at the crippled flagship and faced a decision. The Galactic Union had laws about prisoners of war. Defeated enemies were supposed to be treated with dignity. They were supposed to be taken into custody and delivered to proper authorities. They were supposed to be given trials and sentences that fit their crimes. But Cole knew what they did to their prisoners. He had seen the reports. He had read the testimony of survivors who had escaped from labor camps. He knew that Warlord had personally ordered the enslavement of thousands and the execution of countless more. He opened a channel to the enemy ship. His face appeared on the damaged display. The Warlord was wounded, bleeding from a cut on his scaled head, but his eyes were still full of defiance. He spoke in his harsh language, and the translator converted his words. "You have won this battle, human, but you cannot win the war. A fleet is coming. They were summoned when this engagement began. You have perhaps 2 hours before they arrive. You will die here and your precious will join you." Cole said nothing for a long moment. He thought about the people depending on him, the survivors who needed medical care that only a proper station could provide. His own crew who had given everything to complete this mission. The families back on New Harbor who were waiting for news. He could not afford a detour to transport prisoners. He could not afford to stay and fight a battle fleet. He had to move now if any of them were going to survive. But he was not going to let go unpunished. He gave orders to his crew. Victor Marsh led a team back to the Crimson Fist. They moved through the powerless ship like ghosts, stripping away everything that made it dangerous. Weapons were disabled or removed. Engines were sabotaged beyond repair. Long-range communications were destroyed. Life support was left functional, but only barely. When they were done, the Crimson Fist was nothing but a metal shell drifting in the nebula, and his surviving crew were alive but helpless. They could not call for help. They could not escape. They could only wait and hope that the fleet would find them before their air ran out. Cole opened the channel one last time. "You will live, Warlord. Your crew will live, but you will spend the next few days experiencing what your victims have felt. Fear, helplessness, uncertainty. When your fleet finds you, and they will find you, you will tell them what happened here. You will tell them what humans do when someone calls for help, and you will tell them what happens to those who prey on the innocent." Stared at the human commander with something that might have been respect, or hatred, or both. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The Resolute collected Diana Shaw and her patients from the gentle dawn. The medical shuttle docked with difficulty, its pilot fighting damaged controls and failing systems. But Diana made it. She always made it. Captain was awake now, weak but alive. She had watched the end of the battle from her bed on the shuttle. She had seen the human commander spare the warlord, and she had seen him strip the enemy ship of everything that made it a threat. She did not understand. The Galactic Union taught that mercy meant kindness, that defeated enemies should be treated with compassion, that violence should end when the fighting stopped. But this human had shown a different kind of mercy. He had not killed when he could have killed, but he had not offered comfort either. He had taught a lesson. He had planted fear. He had made certain that they would remember this day. She asked Cole, through the translator, why he had done it this way. Cole looked at her with tired eyes. He had not slept in over 30 hours. He had burns on his arms and a cut on his forehead that Diana had not had time to treat. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side. His answer was simple. Death would have been too quick for someone like. Prison would have been too comfortable. They understand only one thing, and that is strength. If we had shown them kindness, they would have seen it as weakness. They would have come back stronger and angrier. They would have hurt more innocent people. He paused and looked at the stars outside the viewport. This way they will remember. They will tell stories about the humans who came out of nowhere and destroyed their hunters. They will think twice before attacking a helpless ship. And maybe, just maybe, some people who would have died will live because they were afraid. Considered his words. She was a diplomat. She had spent her life finding peaceful solutions to violent problems. She believed in compassion and understanding and the power of gentle words. But she also knew that some enemies could not be reasoned with. Some threats could not be talked away. Sometimes, protection required teeth. The Resolute turned away from the nebula and limped toward friendly space. Behind them, the Crimson Fist drifted in silence. Ahead of them, a long journey waited. They had won, but the galaxy had just begun to learn what that victory meant. Union Station Harmony was the largest space station in the sector, a massive structure that housed millions of beings from dozens of species. It served as a hub for trade, diplomacy, and governance. Its docking bays had welcomed ships from every corner of the galaxy. But no one at Harmony had ever seen anything like the Resolute. The human frigate limped into the station's approach corridor looking more like a wreck than a functioning vessel. Its hull was with plasma burns and kinetic impacts. Entire sections were open to space, sealed only by emergency barriers. Smoke still drifted from vents that had not been properly closed. Behind it, connected by towing cables, came the gentle Dawn. The diplomatic ship was in better condition, but not by much. Its elegant silver hull was dark and cold, its decorative patterns hidden beneath frost that had formed when the life support failed. The station's traffic controllers watched in stunned silence as the two ships approached. They had received the distress signal from the Gentle Dawn days ago. They had logged it as a loss. No one was supposed to survive in territory. But the humans had not asked anyone what was supposed to happen. Commander Cole guided his wounded ship into the docking bay with hands that shook from exhaustion. He had been awake for almost 50 hours. The adrenaline that had carried him through the battle had faded, leaving only bone-deep tiredness and the weight of everything he had done. The Resolute touched down with a gentle bump. The engines finally went silent. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the airlocks opened, and the galaxy got its first real look at what humans could do. Diana Shaw led the medical evacuation. She had kept 17 alive through a battle and a long journey home. She had treated burns and fractures and radiation exposure. She had held the hand of a young scientist who was afraid to die alone. She had not slept more than 2 hours in the past 3 days. The station's medical teams took over with wide eyes and trembling hands. They had never seen a human up close before. Diana was shorter than most of them, but her presence filled the corridor. She moved with purpose and spoke with authority. When a station doctor tried to question her treatment decisions, she silenced him with a look that carried the weight of everything she had survived. Captain was carried out on a stretcher, but she insisted on being conscious for the arrival. She wanted to see harmony. She wanted to see that her people had made it. She wanted to thank the humans who had saved them. Cole walked beside her stretcher as they moved through the station. He looked terrible. His uniform was torn and stained. Bandages covered wounds that had not been properly treated. He walked with a limp that he tried to hide and failed. But when reached out her thin hand, he took it gently. His grip was careful and soft despite the strength she knew those fingers possessed. News of the rescue spread through Harmony like fire through dry grass. Within hours, representatives from a dozen species had gathered in the station's main council chamber to hear what had happened. They wanted answers. They wanted explanations. They wanted to understand how a single human ship had done what no one else would even attempt. The Galactic Union Council was not sure how to respond. Some members were grateful. They were valued throughout the galaxy, and their loss would have been mourned by many. The humans had saved important lives and asked for nothing in return. But others were concerned. The humans had entered territory without permission. They had engaged in combat without Union sanction. They had refused to take prisoners according to established law. They had left Warlord drifting helplessly in the nebula, which some considered cruel and others considered inadequate. The debate went on for hours. Cole was asked to testify. He stood before the assembled representatives, a human among beings who had traveled the stars for thousands of years before his species learned to make fire. He told them what happened. He told them about the signal and the decision to respond. He told them about the battle and the boarding actions and the desperate medical work. He told them about leaving alive but helpless. When he finished, a silence fell over the chamber. The Union representative from the collective, a species known for their logic and reason, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Why did you do it, Commander? Why risk your ship and crew for strangers you had never met? Why enter enemy territory for a species that is not your own? Cole thought about the question. He thought about his crew, most of whom were still in the medical bay. He thought about who might lose the use of his hands. He thought about Victor Marsh, who had lost 2 team members in the boarding action. He thought about Diana Shaw, who had worked miracles with nothing but her skills and her determination. His answer was simple. You sent a signal, we answered. That is what humans do. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species were moved, others were confused, others were afraid. But Captain, watching from her medical bed through a video link, understood. She had seen the humans in action. She had seen them suffer and bleed and refuse to give up. She had seen them choose danger over safety, strangers over self-interest, action over hesitation. She understood that humans were not like other species. They did not calculate the odds before they helped. They did not weigh the costs against the benefits. When someone was in trouble, they came. Simple as that. The news spread beyond Harmony. Traders carried it to distant ports. Diplomats shared it in quiet meetings. Soldiers whispered it in barracks and bases across the sector. The Dominion heard the story from Warlord himself. He had drifted for 3 days before his fleet found him. 3 days of darkness and cold and fear. 3 days of thinking about the humans who had destroyed his hunters and left him alive to suffer. His report to the Dominion Council was not encouraging. He described the humans as relentless and unpredictable. He described their willingness to board enemy ships and fight hand to hand. He described their commander, who had looked at him with eyes that held no hatred but also no mercy. The Dominion did not like what they heard. They began making new plans for dealing with these. But elsewhere in the galaxy, other species took a different lesson from the story. A message began to spread through the channels that connected the stars. It passed from ship to ship and world to world. It reached species that had never heard of humans and species that knew them only as dangerous newcomers to galactic society. The message was simple. When you are in danger, when hope is lost, when no one else will come, call the humans. They will answer. On New Harbor Station, Laura Grant finally received word that the Resolute had reached Harmony safely. She had been waiting for days, barely sleeping, checking her console every few minutes for news. When the confirmation came through, she cried. Then she went back to work. There were other signals to monitor, other calls for help that might come through. And when they did, she knew what would happen. She would pass them to Commander Cole or someone like him, and the humans would answer. Because that was what they did. The Resolute would need months of repair before it could fly again. The crew would need time to heal from their wounds, both physical and mental. The galaxy would need time to understand what had happened in the nebula and what it meant for the future. But one thing was already clear. Humanity had made a promise with their actions. They had shown the galaxy who they were and what they stood for. They had proven that mercy did not mean weakness, and that strength did not require cruelty. They had answered a call for help, and they would keep answering, no matter who called, no matter how dangerous the mission, no matter what it cost them. That was the human way.